Hi Extension 1, here is my presentation. The English Extension Research Project, and I'm reading off my laptop here. We have to select a key text and examine and evaluate manifestations of their selected text in other contexts and media, while considering how and whether the values embedded in one text parallel, challenge, or offer alternatives to the other. We're also supposed to submit an annotated literature review. And we are also meant to look at how the work responds to the actual module, and that's meant to take around about a minute at least, and then you can present however way you want. I am going to do my presentation, a lot of talking to you, and then as I edit this video, it's going to be interspersed with images that I think are important from the novel to help explain what I'm trying to explain. So that's going to be my multimodal part. In fact, this whole presentation is multimodal because I'm filming it. However, you'll be speaking in front of us, and the multimodal aspect of mine will be the images that I put in after I edit this video. So I'm going to spend the first part talking about how this presentation, the direction the presentation took, and how the work responds to the modules and the outcomes to be assessed. So, in terms of the module, the study of Dr. Faustus and Dorian Gray and Gattaca was based upon the way that aspects and concerns from texts from the past have been carried forward, borrowed from, and appropriated into more recent culture. The modules develop students' understanding of how and why cultural values are maintained and changed. So this is what this part of the assessment task is going to focus on. So the study of Dr. Faustus, as we know, was my key text, focusing on making a deal with the actual devil for personal gain and godlike status. Dorian Gray is a direct appropriation of Dr. Faustus in that a deal is made with a metaphorical devil for personal gain and immortal aesthetic appeal. With no direct appropriation of those two texts for a third text, I chose Gattaca because I thought that there was an echo or a manifestation of these ideas. And there is an individual who seeks to make a deal with in a corrupt dystopian society, and the society is the metaphorical devil for personal gain. However, the impact of his personal gain impacts others in a positive way, unlike the other original text. But I'm going to talk about that because he didn't purposely impact people positively. So we need to see if that even actually matters. So what I want to talk about is that cultural values alter over time. And as in the 16th century, religion was a significant aspect of society. God was feared, and it was very much discouraged to go against nature to attain godlike status for personal gain or to rule the world. In Dorian Gray, in this context, a few hundred years later, although religion remained an important part of society, there were other things that became important in society, such as maintaining status through wealth and connections and aesthetic appeal. Now, this was encouraged or influenced by the artistic influences that permeated this particular society. And the aesthetic appeal was influenced by seeking beauty through art, and it was something to seek. And we see Dorian Gray spends all of his life in duality, seeking to maintain his beauty and status while participating in some really base activities and being responsible for the death of others. In contemporary society, religion shifts again as the centre of society, and what is important is free will. And we as a society have experienced discrimination on a number of different levels: racial, cultural, religious, sexual preference. And the advancement of technology and science leads itself to this concern of unrestrained scientific advancement and possible consequences. And we saw that in cloning back in the 80s with Dolly the sheep. Technology rules our lives today more than anything. We are reliant on it for our basic needs, not only for social structures and communication, but for medical help, electricity, entertainment. If technology left us today, I wonder how many of us could survive on our own. I know I would definitely struggle because we've become reliant on the technology within our world. Simply just electricity. How do we get our food? Do we know how to grow our food and forage? I'm getting a bit off topic, but you get the idea that this is what is a really important factor, and that's why the cultural values have shifted over time. So now I'm going to talk about the justifications for the text that I've chosen and how they're manifestations. Now, we talked about the three texts looking at individual desires and those yielding to pleasure that benefits themselves. Now, I thought it was interesting that there were three male protagonists, because I think this also speaks to the patriarchy within our society, of how it's always a male story to tell. And that's why I deliberately chose that, so we could talk about throughout history the forgotten women of history. And that's another topic, but something that's still central to our current society, and how it's very much been a man's world and a man's story. So I thought they had that nice thread as well. Now, both Faustus and Dorian, they suffer dire consequences because of their actions, and thus the values of the characters and the values of the composers differ. Marlowe and Wilde ensure their protagonists suffer as a result of their actions. On the other hand, Vincent in Gattaca, although self-serving, is not only fighting for himself, but kind of stumbles upon, accidentally, fighting against the oppressive society in which he is born. So although he ends up doing a little bit of good, they're all in it for individual gain initially. And he doesn't go out to fight the repression of the world, he goes out to fight so he can go to space, because he's got a bad heart and he's going to die. All the characters are products of and influenced by their political and social climate and context, including religion, aesthetic appeal, power and technology. Dr. Faustus' context was steeped deep in religious belief and fear, thus the inclusion of the literal devil, hoping that the author could instill fear that the audience wouldn't be influenced into seeking out similar behaviours of attempting to exceed and defy God. So you can see that Dr. Faustus, his perspective was to be godlike, whereas the author said, no, actually, I want to say that that's not actually right, because there are going to be dire consequences for him. Very similar in Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray kind of does whatever he wants, and even though we see he's evil, in a way it's kind of admirable, because he just does whatever he wants and still maintains this status in society. However, Wilde steps in and gives him these dire consequences where he dies and crumbles to the floor, showing us that he doesn't actually believe that you should be able to have this unrestrained yielding to desire. However, it's interesting we say that, because Wilde has actually let him live this really long life of doing everything he's ever wanted. And isn't that still better than what most of us do? So although he gave him a consequence right at the end, he still did everything he wanted to do. So I don't think Wilde's perspective was quite as strong as Marlowe's. Again, Vincent in Gattaca is seen as a very likeable character, and we're on Vincent's side all the time. We're saying we want Vincent to succeed, we want him to go to space. And why? Because they've created a very empathetic character where he has been discriminated against, and we empathize with him to help achieve his dream. And then later on we see that he helps Iris, and then he see Iris, I could never remember, and helps the scientist's son as well become that kind of symbol of hope that people can push through this oppressive society. Now, each text provides us with a male experience, which I told you is reflective of the ever-present patriarchy that exists within our society across all contexts and cultures. In Faustus, women are pretty insignificant. In Dorian Gray, they are abused or used to avenge others, as Dorian then takes on Henry's daughter for his love. And in Gattaca, they're on the sidelines, a metaphor for the dominant culture of men and how it is only a man's story that matters, which obviously I don't think, but I thought it was interesting that those three stories came into thread, and that was something else that threaded them together. The idea of the devil is literal in Faustus, symbolic in the other two texts, and in Gattaca the society is the devil as it discriminates against the powerless. What values are present in each text, and we're going to continue to talk about how they conform or challenge with one another. And where values derive. The values within Faustus fall in line with Dorian Gray in that the protagonist values self above all others, and his actions and decisions are based on the desire to become God, possess power. This impacts Faustus negatively, as his deal with the devil cannot be undone, leading to his demise. As we know, Dorian values pleasure and being adored for his appearance, vain and obsessed by his aesthetic appeal. He negatively impacts the lives of others. There is something inherently human about him, in that the reader relates as we struggle each day with the way we are perceived, with each of us being constantly tempted to yield to temptations. So in some ways, we as the reader, we live vicariously through him and his evil deeds, Wilde also values aesthetic appeal, but because of the dire and irreversible consequences Dorian faces at the conclusion of the text, it is clear that unrestrained desire will lead to punishment, even if you've lived this crazy life. Although Gattaca values self and yielding to one's ambitions and desires, the film goes beyond this idea of self and also values freedom, free will, and the idea of succeeding as a result of determination and hard work, rather than bias and discrimination. Although Jerome's actions directly impact him positively, he is not the only one to be impacted by his decisions. Irene and the doctor's son use Jerome as a symbol of hope. Everyone too finds purpose through Jerome. Eugene finds purpose through Jerome, and his perfect DNA is validated. However, because he positively impacts others inadvertently and is motivated by his own dreams, is he any better than Faustus and Dorian? I kind of don't think so. Going to talk about some important symbolic elements. We've talked about the devil. I'm going to talk about nature and how nature is an important motif throughout the text. In Dr. Faustus, he goes against the natural order by making a deal with the devil. In Dorian Gray, what happens to him is unnatural, and yet there is an emphasis on the beauty of nature. In Gattaca, there's an absence of nature because the focus is on technology and science, and nature is separated under a glass dome. And this shows that nature is always valued in society in all the different cultures that we are looking at, but it becomes kind of nature versus unnatural in each of the texts, but nature always comes through in the end, because no matter what Vincent achieves, nature or whatever is wrong with him is going to kill him eventually. We've talked a bit about character versus perspective. The characters act in particular ways that do not necessarily align with the author's intent. In Faustus and Gattaca, the characters face irreversible consequences that lead to their destruction. Thus, the author's text serves a warning to the reader about unrestrained desire. In Gattaca, the author's purpose aligns with the character, as Jerome not only achieves his dream, but provides hope to an authoritarian society. So values change over time according to context, according to what is the important ideology that permeates society. And we've talked about how religion was, how aesthetic beauty and status was, and how now that has become a focus of technology. So the three texts had a number of threads. It wasn't just it was the key elements of nature, it was the male story, it was the things that were important in each of these cultures that influenced the characters' actions. So I hope you have enjoyed my multimodal presentation about cultural values and manifestations of texts. Don't forget, you will also need to submit an annotated literature review in alphabetical order with a paragraph describing the relevance to your inquiry question. So make sure you add that as well. I hope this helped. Bye for now.